shared. Oops. And thank you all for joining us this evening. My name is Amy, and we have Erin as well, and we are the broads behind Broads and Books. And Broads and Books is the funny and feminist book podcast. Every other week, we have an episode where we pick a theme, and we each choose a novel on that theme. We each choose an other genre book, including short story collections on that theme, and we always pick a pop culture pick on that theme as well. And in addition to our regular episodes where we also tell weird stories and we have cats just wandering in at various times and attacking Erin, who is allergic, we also have a bonus series where we talk to authors, the authors that we love, about the books that they love. And when we talk to these authors, what we're finding is that for the most part, they were all readers first. And so they love to talk about books. So from that bonus series, we thought it was a good idea to talk to some other writers, to have an event where we could bring other writers together. And that's where we are today. Right, Erin?
Yes, absolutely. And this event in particular is kind of close to our heart because, as you mentioned, we talk about short story collections all the time. And it was a great timing with Amy's collection coming out to gather some short story writers that also have collections coming out from small presses that are exciting. And so you get to hear from all of them tonight. You get a chance to ask questions if you want to. There's going to be some discussions. We're going to ask some questions. So we encourage you, put those in the chat, send them. We'll make sure that they get answered to the best of our ability. But you're going to hear some great stuff. You're going to want to buy, 4 books. I mean, if you haven't already bought the books, you're definitely going to want to buy 4 books. When they're reading, we'll put the links in the chat so that you have a way to buy all those and support all of these great authors. So I think that we're going to start with our first one.
Yes, and I want to introduce Jen Fawkes. And first, I want to tell you about her book, which is called Tales the Devil Told Me. It won the 2020 Press 53 Award for short fiction, and it is out now. Right, Jen?
Yes.
Is that available now? Excellent. Okay. Absolutely. And I want to read this description of the book because it's wild and it's wonderful. What if Captain Hook gave up marauding and took a gig at the post office? How did Hamlet's uncle Claudius become such a rat? What might happen if a plastic surgeon fell for Medusa? These 12 stories examine the possible lives of classic literary villains while illuminating the consumptive nature of love, the crushing weight of isolation, the false promise of beauty, and the power of storytelling itself. So a lot going for it. They're wild, they're hilarious, they're terrific. And Jen herself, Jen's debut book, Mannequin and Wife, was a 2020 Shirley Jackson Award nominee. It won 2 2020 Forward Indies, and it was named one of Large Hearted Boy's favorite short story collections of 2020. Her work has appeared in One Story, Lit Hub, Crazy Horse, The Iowa Review, Best Small Fictions 2020, and many others. She's the recipient of the 2021 Porter Fund Literary Prize. You live in Little Rock, Arkansas, with your husband and 2 cats named Tessio and Clemenza, which I don't know if there's better names for cats. So with that, take us away, Jen. Tell us any more about your book, too, that you would like to.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you so much, Amy, for that really wonderful introduction. Tessio and Clemenza, they are the heavies in our organized crime organization. You know, they're, my husband and I both, I'm a big movie nut, and my husband is a big Godfather nut. So, you know, we recently got some kittens, and these are the names we came up with for them. We call them Tess and Clem, but they're, you don't want to mess with them. You don't want to get behind in your payments to either of them. Just let me say that. The book, Tales the Devil Told Me, which is that Tales the Devil Told Me. This was actually my MFA thesis project. And it is, each of the stories reimagines a different well-known classic tale, but all tales that were popular in their day. So at the time that these texts came out, they were pop fiction, Shakespeare and Sherlock Holmes. Now they are archaic and somewhat difficult. So one of my projects, for modern readers. So my project was I wanted to retell stories recentering on the villain character, the quote unquote villain character, But then I also wanted to make them accessible to people who know the background, say people who know everything about Sherlock Holmes, or to people who only know that he was a detective in Victorian England, who knew a dude named Watson or whatever. So, the stories were it started out as a thematically linked planned book. And fortunately, I was able to write enough stories to fill a book that fit the bill. So tonight, I'm going to read the beginning of one of my favorite stories. And it takes me exactly 5 minutes to read this. The story is called Tiny Bones. And I don't know if I should tell you up front. This is a story that's got a good slow reveal. By the very end of the story, you realize who the villain is. But I don't. Maybe I should tell you guys up front. This is it's a origin story for the witch who ate Hansel and Gretel. Okay, so this is Tiny Bones. It started with a boy named Wilhelm. I was staying with his family long, long ago when a great dearth fell upon the land. Like the famines of my youth, this dearth felt interminable and seemed in many ways to redefine want. There was neither a crust of bread nor a glop of gruel to be had. And as the dearth wore on, day in and day out, as Wilhelm's family and I grew weak and delirious with hunger, we were eventually unable to rise from our beds and remained supine from sunup to sundown, dreaming of sustenance and slowly but surely starving to death. Wilhelm's father made a living cutting wood, and his modest cottage had a limited number of beds. So I was forced to share with Wilhelm, a small and rather sickly 11-year-old, a bundle of nerves and awkward energy with thick spectacles and oversized feet. The boy snorted when he laughed and cried at the slightest provocation. And I often caught his father, a brawny outdoorsman, staring at Wilhelm, his expression mingling consternation and disappointment with something approaching hatred. I myself grew fond of the boy during the months we spent huddled under blankets, trying not to think of the gnawing in our guts. Before Wilhelm, I hadn't had much experience with children. In truth, I was rather frightened of them. But balancing on the brink of death leads to intimacy, and Wilhelm and I often held one another and wept long into the night. He was a great one for making up sentimental songs and doing silly voices. And if I'd been denied these distractions for which, if his father caught him, he would be yanked from bed and backhanded, desperate pathways might have opened to my mind. I should have done something. I should have tried to protect Wilhelm, but the woodcutter was an undeniable figure of authority, and I was a guest in his home, an unmarried cousin, a spinster, a burden, and felt that I had no right. Moreover, what happened to Wilhelm makes any such regrets beside the point. When I say what happened to Wilhelm, I really mean to say what we did to him, his father and I, and his 2 sisters, and yes, even his own mother. What we did as the months wore on, as we all grew dull and listless, living on nothing but tepid water, breadcrumbs, and distant memories of nourishment. Wilhelm, who was, as I have perhaps already stated, rather sickly, started one afternoon breathing raggedly and sweating, and there were no more songs or silly voices, just the boy, now a collection of bones held together by membranous, vein-mapped skin. He stared with unblinking eyes that seemed to follow me like those of certain oil paintings. When Wilhelm's breath grew more labored and his gaze more intensely disconcerting, I called for his father, who dragged himself out of bed and staggered across the room. He looked down at the boy and placed a calloused paw on Wilhelm's forehead. The gesture was the most tender I'd ever seen the woodcutter make, and my eyes fogged, and I realized that even the most seemingly immovable man is capable of tapping into the deep well of feeling that joins us all as members of the human race. Even a man who, for instance, abandons at the altar a girl of 20 in whose belly his seed has taken root, her head covered by a handmade lace shawl, the only surviving memento of her mother. When I wiped my eyes, I saw that Wilhelm's father had shifted his hand. It now covered the boy's mouth and nose. Wilhelm's bony limbs twitched under the bedclothes, and his fingers grasped weakly at mine. And then he grew still. It was a stillness I'd witnessed only once before, a stillness that spoke of permanence, of finality. "The boy is dead," Wilhelm's father announced to the room at large, while fixing me with a look that said the manner of his death was something I would disclose at my own peril. Using reserves of strength I never would have guessed at, I pushed away from Wilhelm's body and to my feet. Wilhelm's mother and sisters rose from their beds and stumbled over, and we all stood staring down at Wilhelm's stillness. I was crying, but none of the others shed a tear. After a time, Wilhelm's mother sighed and said they might as well get started. "Get started with what?" I asked. That's 5 minutes.
Perfect place to stop too, because I remember that story. That gets intense. Thank you, Jen.
Yeah, maybe I should have read something a little funnier, but
Oh,
that one I'm practicing on.
Oh, that was great. I
Thank
was
you.
in it. Yes. Well, next we're going to go to Jennifer Fliss, whose book, The Predatory Animal Ball, is coming out in December from OK Donkey Press. So that's perfect Christmas shopping. I'm just saying. You can order it. It comes, you give it. It's great. All right. So a little bit about the book first. In a society where the predators are the ones doing the celebrating, Jennifer Fliss's debut collection of short stories, The Predatory Animal Ball, crashes the party. These stories are about the people left in the predator's wake and the large and small ways grief and fear manifest. Predators always appear in the places we least expect it, and this collection turns the previously accepted hierarchies upside down in a series of flash fictions that are often absurd but always cutting. I mean, you have to buy it now, right? So a little bit more about Jennifer. She's been nominated several times for the Pushcart Prize and Best of the Net, and was selected for inclusion in the 2019 Best Small Fictions Anthology. Over 200 creative writing pieces have appeared in print and online in places like The Rumpus, Pank, The Washington Post, Friction, The Kitchen, and elsewhere. She was the 2018-2019 Penn Prentice Fellow and a recipient of a 2019 Artist Trust Gap Award. She is available to edit and consult on writing projects. And when not writing, she can be found riding her bike, running, trying to learn the ukulele, pining for New York, intellectually sparring with her young daughter, and occasionally swinging on the flying trapeze. And it says really, as in, like, I think that's real. So she might tell us more about that. We'll see.
It is real, although I used to do it all the time. Now I don't. And I did it a little before the pandemic, but then the pandemic happened. So haven't done it in a while.
Well, the fact that you did it's amazing. So
it's so much fun. And you can just go if you have a trapeze rig near you. You can just go one time for the experience. It's really worth it.
You're much more daring than I am.
Two short. One is really short. One is really, really short. Okay, so both of these are in this. This is called Sex Drive. The fine people who live on Sex Drive are often seen as a wanton lot. The road ends in a cul-de-sac where whispers and gossip collect in front of 1916 modern, not so modern anymore houses. They should not be blamed for taking advantage of a real estate market that allowed them to purchase a small lot with a large house much larger than their needs. They would not have been able to get into this neighborhood otherwise. One thing to note, her sex drive is not the same as his sex drive. She sees oaks and maples and the peeling paint of the house across the street. He sees that the wife across the street mows the lawn in very short shorts and that their lawn is very close cut. The mailman, the milkman, the gas company reps. They stop into Sex Drive and they leave behind eyes, behind curtains, behind perfectly clean windows. Peekaboo to the children and to each other. The curtains are heavy, damask with a trail of gold swirling through the fabric. Lacquered nails trace the pattern, if not bitten to the quick. A tired, worn block in a tired, worn suburb, outside a tired, worn city under a halcyon sky. After a big rain, the gutters are useless. The puddles become ponds, become small lakes. You might consider them water features. If you look close enough, you can see up the neighbor's skirt as she brazenly tromps right through the iridescent, oily water. But you don't have to do that since you can see up her skirt any old time. That's the thing when you live here. Oh, the townspeople laugh, a glint of jealousy in their eyes. You live on Sex Drive, do you? Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Except that last one was not a nudge, but a pat on your thigh. No, not a pat, but a rub, a caress. Is it wanted? Is it wanted? They come to parties, to dinners. They leave a little less sure of their own place on Evergreen Lane and Willow Creek Trail. The fine folks of Sex Drive have created a neighborhood watch. They watch, they listen, they salivate at the thought of being watched and listened to. So do you, don't you? And then another one. This will be the last one. It's called Trees Like a Way Out. And this was published in OK Donkeys magazine. The previous one was in Cease Cows online. All right, so I needed gas and I rolled into the Sunoco practically on fumes. And next to me was Bob Ross. And I'm like, hey man, Bob Ross? He nodded. Look at those trees, I said. Tell me about those trees. And Bob Ross was like, I'm just filling my gas, friend. He was filling up with premium. Must be something to live like Bob Ross. I ran into the food mart quickly, keeping my eye on Bob through the window. I slapped down a 10 on the counter. Pump 3, please. Under the harsh lights and amidst the aroma of slowly churning hot dogs, I realized maybe I was dead and this was a kind of way station to heaven and Elvis and Jesus would pull in at any moment. Gran always said she saw Jesus in things, toast, tea, Target. I ran back out and selected the cheapest gas. Bob Ross was at the pump next to mine and his car was a 1985 Plymouth Voyager. You know that minivan, the one with the wood paneling along the side? It was just like Gran's living room, minus the crystal bowls of Werther's and Precious Moments dolls. But the wood paneling, sometimes it felt like those panels were prison bars. She eventually had the paneling taken down, and after that I'd push my cheek up against the cold plaster of the wall and feel free and soothed, but like something was missing. Gran raised me after my parents left together. I spent hours watching PBS while my grandmother knit in the corner. She made scarves that never ended. She didn't say much, except to say the following things. Are you capable of anything? What do you want to be when you grow up? Why don't you apply yourself in school? But then once she gave me some paints and a book of fancy paper just because. She'd run her fingers along the paint when it dried and pulled her lips into a line that said she liked my use of textures. One of my first paintings was a great big tree with a nest of robins in a high branch. Robins don't nest that high up, Gran said, but she hung it on the fridge anyway, where it still was, nearly 20 years later, hidden beneath coupons, childhood school photos of my mom, and reminders of doctor's appointments long past. I said, hey, Bob Ross, your car reminds me of my gran. And he was all offended. And I was like, no, in a good way. You know those Precious Moments dolls? I said, with their eyelashes and the cow eyes, he asked. Yeah, I said, those. I didn't mean it like that, but I didn't think Bob Ross wanted to really hear what I meant. Bob Ross was quiet for a moment. He was like, yeah, they were cute. I loved watching your show when I was a kid, I said, towing my shoe along some old gum, suddenly shy. Thanks, he said, and began to clean his windshield. Small rivers of dirt water fell off the ends as he completed one line, then the next. Even finer strips of dirt were left on the windshield. It went dirt, clean window, so that when Bob was satisfied, he replaced the brush into the murky water bucket by the pumps. I looked at the not entirely straight lines in his windshield and thought, this was an artist. He didn't say anything else, and I felt compelled to fill the space of silence. The trees, you know, the little trees, you made it seem so easy. Yeah, he paced by his pump, his dollars ticking away behind him on the screen. Yeah, in the end, just those little marks made everything so beautiful. That's art. I paused for a moment, heard the click of my own gas pump. Yeah, it is, he said. Back in my car, I realized I just saw Bob Ross. I picked up my cell phone to take a photo, but the Voyager was gone. But I did notice a shiny rainbow puddle where the van had been and believed it was beautiful in its way, the way all toxic things are. I snapped a quick photo. Maybe I'd share it on social media. Gran just got a smartphone, so I zipped the image off to her and hoped she'd be able to see it. And that's Bob.
That was terrific. Thank you so much.
Yes. So
Thank
great.
you.
Well, we got a clap in the comments. So
Yeah.
well done.
That was amazing.
Awesome. Well, next up, oh, sorry, Podcat is leaving. There we go. Next up, we have Carmella Gray-Cosgrove, and her book, Nowadays and Lonelier, is out now from Arsenal Pulp Press. Is that right, Carmella? Okay.
Out in Canada. It's actually not out in the States until the spring, but I think you can
There we
order
go.
it.
We'll build
You
up
can order it
demand.
anyways. Yeah.
Build up demand here in the US. A little bit about the book. Nowadays and Lonelier features a cascade of characters seeking connection in the darkest alleyways and meaning in the mundane. In these pages, a ballet dancer navigates complex family ties that are frayed by addiction. A young girl discovers sex and sexuality in the 90s in Vancouver's downtown East Side. A lover sojourns in Egypt and exacts an unexpected revenge. The collection is concerned with the contrast experienced by working and middle-class millennials between access to education and art compared to the relative lack of access to secure jobs and housing, and how these conditions leave many straddling a world where mental health, addictions, and sex work are daily realities as they try to carve out space for themselves in times that are increasingly alienating. That seems to describe just everything right now, so well done. And about Carmella, she grew up in the downtown east side of Vancouver and now lives in St. John's, Newfoundland. Her writing explores geography, loneliness, race, class, trauma, and addiction. She holds a BA in English Lit from UBC and an MA in Geography from Memorial University of Newfoundland. Her fiction has appeared or is forthcoming in Riddle Fence, Broken Pencil Online, Free Fall, the Antigonish Review, and an anthology called Hard Ticket. And she's the 2020 writer in residence for Riddle Fence. So take it away, Carmella.
Thank you. This is my book. Is it backwards? Yes, it's backwards. No? Oh, it's backwards on mine. I'm going to read from the first little bit of a short story that is set in France, which is not usual. Most of my stories are set in Canada. And it's about this like kind of sad and slow demise of an international relationship. But I'm just going to read the first few pages. And you can read the rest of it in my book. And you can also, tomorrow I have an Instagram takeover on my publisher's Instagram page, which is Arsenal Pulp Press. So if you want to learn more about the book, you can log on there. The story is called Float. I think the float will be an enlightenment. I think the weightlessness, the confinement, the disorientation will transport me to a new plane. That it will take me back to the womb, that it'll be a rebirth, that the deprivation of my senses will release me from their bondage. I think it will inspire me, that I'll emerge unstoppable, my creative force unleashed. I buy the spa package as a birthday present for myself. I reserve an afternoon appointment a week in advance. I wake on my birthday morning full of hope for the day and the year ahead. I hear a truck idling outside my front door and voices conferring loudly. When I poke my head out, I see two men removing a dead cat from my front step. He must have been hit, the city worker says, as he holds a black garbage bag open and the other man lowers the carcass slowly to the bottom. There's a pool of blood on the concrete. I have just returned home, alone again, moved my few boxes from storage. I met the boyfriend I've just left on a cruise ship. He was working and I was on a budget Mediterranean package I lucked into on points. He had long hair that was bleached by the sun. I kissed him in the galley after hours. We had sex for the first time just moments later. I lifted one thigh onto the deep freeze, hiked up my skirt, leaned back on my hands as he gripped my butt cheeks and fumbled into me. Instead of boarding my flight home from Gibraltar, I got on his flight to Marseille, and we arrived in the very early morning. We walked into his childhood bedroom hand in hand. a faded navy and maroon plaid quilt, a poster on the wall with a French flag and a footballer mid-kick that said Zizou in bubbly letters over his head. He kept the room in his mother's home because he said it didn't make sense to find a place for those few months a year that he wasn't on a ship. We slept tightly spooned in his single bed that night and every night after that. By morning, the sheets were soaked in sweat. On the second day, his mother showed me her mastectomy scar, and I thought of the goddess Diana. The surgery and reconstruction had been done over 20 years before, and her nipple was tattooed back on in a dark brown spiral, like a lollipop at a fun fair. Her neon green budgie was perched on her shoulder. When people think of Diana, they think of the statue of the Roman goddess, Diana with a doe, a masculine huntress reaching into the quiver on her back for an arrow. But the Ephesian counterpart has rows and rows of teats covering her whole torso and orphaned animals suckling off them, though some people have said they aren't breasts, but bull testicles. She's the goddess of wild beasts and fertility. Paradoxically, she's also an eternal virgin. Maybe it was the budgie on his mother's shoulder that made me think of Diana, or maybe it was the nonchalance of the exhibition. When she showed me the reconstructed breast, it was perfunctory. I didn't ask to see, she just volunteered it. An explanation for why she no longer went topless at the beach, which was where we were headed that morning, towels over our shoulders, beach bags stuffed with supplies for the day. She held a can of aerosol surface cleaner in one hand for her morning chores, had a cigarette stuck to her lips, and pulled out one of her earbuds for the conversation. She was wearing a tank top over a black underwire bra and lifted both layers on one side to show me. I could hear the Bee Gees buzzing out from the tiny speaker dangling by her collarbone. His mother made coffee cake for breakfast, the top dusted with granulated sugar and cinnamon. She had it on the table with a jug of orange juice. Our plates were laid out with cutlery, glasses, and paper napkins. Once we were settled at the table, she put her earbuds back in. As we ate, the budgie watched us from his perch on her shoulder, while she spritzed and polished the shelves in the living room, taking down each ceramic knickknack and spritzing and polishing those too. She sang "I Started a Joke" quietly to herself, her cigarette bouncing between her lips. We sipped our juice. Some days later, we took a trip to Paris. I had always wanted to go, and I found 20-euro flights on Ryanair. I booked us a cheap Airbnb in the 19th arrondissement. He said he would be my tour guide, as he had lived in Paris in his university days, which were short-lived, he said. University wasn't for him. We explored his old neighborhood in the poor end of the 18th, then went to Montmartre, then to the heart of the city, the Eiffel Tower, the Arc de Triomphe, the Louvre. They don't have Diana of Ephesus at the Louvre, just the huntress. I made a point of finding her nonetheless, but did not see my boyfriend's mother in that rendition. Our flat had a double bed, and it was a treat to have air between us while we slept. When we made love on that trip, he started calling me a slut. I noticed, of course, but felt neither aroused nor offended. I merely observed as the fantasy unfolded behind his eyelids, as the word, repeated as if to himself, propelled his pebble of a heart to beat faster, the blood flushing to his cheeks, everything swelling with the excitement of a depravity that was not really there. I squished my tits together, arched my spine, and threw back my head to see if I could believe it too. Sex is always so hard to read.
It is, but it's wonderful.
Yeah, you did
terrific.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You just want to laugh.
All right. Well, last this evening, we have our very own Amy Lee Lillard, who probably doesn't need an introduction for our listeners, but her book, Dig Me Out, is out now from Atelier 26 Books, so you can get that. What I'm seeing is a great 4-pack Christmas gift, but I don't know how many times I can say that. Just do it. Okay.
It's great.
So about the book, Dig Me Out gives us 10 deeply absorbing stories about the women who won't smile. Angry, aching women reacting to the dismissal of their most secret or beloved needs and desires. Women returning to base instincts, primal fears, and mythic power. Across past, present, and future, around the Midwest and the world, these women demand we witness as they work to break through, to defy, to become. It won't be pretty and it won't be safe, but it will be real. So a little bit about Amy. She is the author of Dig Me Out. She was shortlisted for the 2017 Berlin Writing Prize and named one of Epiphany's breakout 8 writers in 2018. Her fiction and nonfiction appears in Barrel House, Foglifter, Epiphany, Off Assignment, and other publications. Amy is the co-creator, co-host, and producer of Broads and Books, the funny and feminist book podcast. She lives in Des Moines, Iowa. That's all I have for you.
Oh, that's great. It's just still very weird to have.
For me to talk about you.
Yeah, very strange. I'm going to read a story from just a bit of a story called Pretty Girls Make Graves. And at this point, all that we know is there is a pregnant woman that has run to the Wyoming mountains and is avoiding all contact with everyone. I dug trenches around the perimeter where the wild grass gave way to trees and gravel. I dug steep drops. I went slow and easy, slipping the shovel into dirt wet from the previous night's thunderstorm, letting her move within me, giving her room to breathe as I did. I talked to her as we worked. A good trench is a lost art, I told her. We don't create lines like we used to. When I talked to the cabin owner on the phone, an old woman who'd advertised on Craigslist and asked for pennies, she said the cabin was pre-war. I asked which war. She laughed. At least in the First World War, I told my daughter as we dug, you knew which side was which, even if they were only separated by a few yards. West trenches, the good guys. East trenches, the bad. In the middle, no man's land. I thought of maps, systems of deep lines running across a continent, like arteries, veins, things that bled deep red and smelled of rust. A few feet down, I jumped in the hole. A little bit more, I told her, enough to crouch and give line of sight while still protecting. Since it's just us, it doesn't have to be much wider than this. My hands shook and an angry red line of welts and blisters budded on my palm. Behind us, a football field away, the sun was setting behind the cabin. Down the mountain, I heard the sound of a motor. We went to my knees in the trench, counting the seconds. 151 passed before a crap Hyundai with a wheezing exhaust pipe cleared. Another 86 before the motor faded down the other side. It's tight, I told her, but it's good notice. Him. For months, he tried to figure it out. Why did she run when he had love to give? From his corner stool in the bar, he'd seen her walk in alone. Darkness in her hair and skin, but also under the hoods of her eyes. Most guys wanted brightness, the cool girl, up for whatever. She wasn't like that, he could tell. He thought of her naked beneath him, her skin dark against his gray linen sheets. There hadn't been many women. He wondered sometimes if she was even real, if he'd dreamt her. It was only one night, after all. But he wouldn't have dreamt all the angry red marks on her forearms, or how her pores smelled like grain alcohol. He wouldn't have dreamt her slack cheeks and lips when she looked at the ceiling, at the armoire, how quickly she flipped over so he couldn't see that slackness. He wouldn't have dreamt that she'd leave so quick, ignore his texts. When he found out where she'd been, it all made sense to him. She was wounded. She needed him. He'd been waiting for someone to need him. At night, I took to sitting on the grass beyond the front door. No lights in the cabin or outside. Ants crawled on my legs. Lightning bugs brushed my cheek. Owls and bats screeched in the night wind. The light of other worlds beyond this one shone above. Sometimes I'd put on some music, cue up my favorite song. Sometimes I'd listen to the sounds of wild things. This is peace, I told her. It felt good to name the feeling. She turned, kicked. She'd started moving more within, and I thought of alien films, the creature lurking under the skin, ready to burst forth in a shower of blood. I thought of shrapnel, alien bodies slicing from the other side to get in. We can't help it, I said as I spread my hands in the grass behind me. Being around other people, we can't help fighting for what's ours. My girl kicked again. What's your name? I wondered if there was a name that would give protection as well as power. Could I brand her so all could see she was not to be touched? What language would that be? I pictured her afloat in her placenta, speaking her own aquatic language, an amniotic language based in my body's heartbeat and rushing blood and rolling bile. When I first got back from Iraq, I did what I was supposed to do. I got a job at the pizza place in the main square. I took a couple classes at the community college in the next town. One of my teachers talked about dialects and languages, how English and Arabic and Spanish, all the world's languages, derived from the same language. Over time, people moved away from their roots, developed new words, created wholly different languages to separate us from each other. I wondered, looking at our cabin, at the dark, at my trenches, if all those different languages came from mothers searching for the right sounds that would mark their children as safe. There we are.
There. Ooh, I couldn't unmute myself for a second. Yeah, that was great. Thank you. Thank you to all the readers. That was great.
So Erin, let's ask some questions. What do you
Yeah, let's.
Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
yes. And a reminder to everyone that's attending, send the questions. You got some great short story flash fiction writers here. Anything, it's open. If you want to know about their writing process, what they like to read, any of those questions.
All that kind of stuff. And maybe we could start with, we brought everyone here together because you're all writers of short stories. And we know personally that short stories can be such a powerful experience, but also can be very challenging. So I'm wondering for each of you, what is it about short stories that you love as both a writer and as a reader? And anyone can start.
I can start. I love writing them because they're so much more manageable in my brain than a long story. But I find reading them to be a very different experience from reading long form fiction, which I actually prefer. Like I prefer reading novels. But short stories are such a nice way of like getting a hit. It's like getting a hit if you need it. I don't know. I'm working on a novel now and it's such a different experience and I don't like it as much as writing short fiction, but it's interesting as a reader to not like the genre as much that I write in. I don't know if anyone else has that experience.
I agree. I pretty much agree. Yeah, that's. I mean, I wrote short
Guys, we're
fiction.
supposed to be selling short stories.
Right. That's
Stay
why
on message, everybody. Stay on.
Yeah.
Well, writing. I mean, I think when I first started writing, I was entirely alone. I was like in a not a great place in my life, and I was like, I'd been thinking about writing since I was a child, but I was old, and was like, I'm going to try to do this, and I tried to write a novel. First thing I did, I wrote like 3 novels, so it's just like in a row. And then I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. So I said, how can I learn how to write fiction? Dialogue and scene and, characters, how you develop them. I know, I'll write short stories. So I went to short fiction and I read a ton of good, I was always a big reader, but I read, a lot of short fiction I had read, and I started trying to figure out how to write a successful arc, like a story that, that moved from beginning to end. And I think that it is, it's the way to learn how to handle all the elements of fiction is by, and I think in ways writing short stories, as Carmella said, I need the satisfaction of finishing, because when you finish a piece of work to your satisfaction, I mean, I've done a lot of things and nothing feels better. I mean, I've done a lot of things that feel good, but it's like the ultimate to finish a project. And a novel is really, a long form fiction is really never finished. So I agree with that. And I also think that it teaches you the basic elements of story writing, the basic elements of narrative, of creating a narrative, of how to create characters, of how to handle dialogue, all these things that you then can hopefully, for me, I'm still working on translating that into a successful novel, and I have been for a decade. But I do think that taking, perfecting the story form, not perfecting, but, taking it on and feeling like you understand how it's done is the best first step for any sort of, fictional other writing you want to do. And but I have to say, there are some stories, I love story collections that are adventurous and that are wildly varied. I'm not a big fan of it. Like if a story collection, if by the 3rd story, it's like, okay, I'm reading the same story, I'm generally not maybe going to finish the collection. I feel like they are slightly more challenging because you're forced to go down into a narrative and then come back out, and go down into a new narrative and come back out. Whereas with a long form, you get to sink down into one place and stay there. But, you know, they are where a lot of the most exciting things are happening. They are more challenging in terms of, like, a novel is like this big baggy monster, and a lot of stuff can happen within its confines. It is not necessarily going to be tight, but a short story has to be like tight. You know, you have to, it's more like a poem, in that it has to really work. The language has to be more precise and all that stuff. Sorry if I'm going on for too long.
No, that I think
No,
I
that
agree
was
with
great.
a lot of that. Yeah. And for you, Jen Fliss, you're writing flash fiction. And so it's even shorter, it's even more powerful. What do you think about, what is it that about the really short fiction that you were drawn to?
You know, generally most of my work is short, but I do write some longer stuff as well. And it wasn't a choice. It just, that's when I sit and write a story, that's how long it comes out. And it seems that whatever my natural understanding, and in 2012, I took a fiction class, and it was like, taught me everything I know kind of thing. And I mean, I agree with both what Jen and Carmella said too. But it's just naturally, that's what happens. It just comes out pretty short. And I like writing the short stuff because I have a lot of ideas. And I'm kind of like that dog in Up who's like, oh, squirrel, right? And so it works for me to be able to get out all the stories that I want to get out. As it is, there's thousands more. Some people write novels more naturally. It's just different styles, not me. I have a novel that's kind of in revision, sort of / sitting on the computer. It's much harder, but for reading, they do different things. I love falling into a world that I like, that has great ambiance and setting that like a novel would have. But short stories, you can, like Jen said, they're often more interesting because they almost can be, because they don't have they can be riskier because you don't have a giant book. You know, if the reader isn't into it, they can move on to the next one. And in terms of publishing, I mean, it's harder to sell a short story collection for lots of reasons, but mainly I think because it's hard to market. You know, what's this book about? Well, it's about this, about that. But I actually think that the broader world of readers who aren't writers would actually find that they really liked short stories if they got them in their hands. Because we do have shorter attention spans, and yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. I love the idea of you have so many ideas and you need to turn them into stories. I've been feeling that way, so I need to start this. I need to do some flash fiction.
Well, I think that's a good jumping off point, because you kind of all mentioned it about things that are inside you. And I saw a participant ask the question of how much of you or your life, of your own thoughts, make it into your short stories. How much of you is on the page and how much is fiction? I think that's what all readers want to know, right? We want to know all the juicy details of your life. So feel free.
I'll go.
Yeah.
Jen Fliss.
Did you meet Bob Ross in a van?
I did not meet Bob Ross in a van. Most of my stories are very fictional, especially because
Bummer.
they tend to take on a little bit of a fabulous thing. Thematically, I write on things that I have experience with, you know, abuse, misogyny, various bullying, but the specifics of the stories are not at all anything that I've experienced. And even the stuff that's not like a woman melting or meeting Bob Ross, like, it's not hard for me to separate fiction and nonfiction. It's just clearly I naturally gravitate towards themes that my life has been built around. So
I think that's, for my own self, I think that's true in terms of just sort of the thematic things that happens in the story. You know, like Erin said, overall in my book, it's a lot of angry women. And anger is something I imagine we all experience, but there's so many times I know I internalize my anger and it's so frustrating. And so this was a way to almost like fantasy of like, ooh, what would happen if we let it all out, you know? And so it's a starting point of reality. And then it's like, let's play, let's see what happens.
Well, when I was a very new writer, I didn't understand at all that I was writing about myself in any way. I very much don't, I'm not interested in myself is what I believe, is what I'd like to believe. And, you know, I am not someone who's interested in, say, writing a memoir, or, you know, I've had a very, very bizarre life and lots of really weird stuff has happened to me. And people are always like, oh, you know, you should write a memoir. But I really, like, I do not want to write directly about myself. But I feel that everybody who writes any type of anything, poetry, prose, I mean, no matter how hard you resist it, you are writing about yourself. Every character that you come up with is an aspect of you. Otherwise, I don't think you could really change, or if it's a successful story, you couldn't really channel them. So I do believe that everything we write is based in our experience, our lives, our feelings. And I think that it's a way that some people maybe come to terms with things they wish they didn't feel, or were like, this is terrible to feel. It's one of the ways that fiction has helped me with, like, working through, like, am I a monster, or is everybody a monster? You know, it's so I don't directly ever write about myself. I mean, I, in fact, have in the past preferred to take on male personas, usually in my work. Now I am finally in a place where I'm like, I think I can write about women. I think I can actually do it some justice, because I think it's harder to write about women, just really. But so yes and no, big yes and big no for me. Sorry.
Yeah, I would agree with what you said about everything being about you, not you, about the writer, that you can't, it's really inescapable. Like, how can you escape your own perspective on the world? But yeah, I mean, I draw really heavily from my life and my experiences. I mean, obviously, it's like hugely fictionalized, but especially I find geographically, like, I have a really hard time setting stories in places I've never lived or been, because setting is so, even if it doesn't feature heavily in the story, it's just like really important to understanding like how people are moving through space and what they're thinking when they're, you know, I can't like escape that. So I find all my stories are generally set in places that I'm really, really familiar with. And yeah, inevitably you're like stewing on things in your life that have happened, and they just eke into everything.
Yeah, I have the same thing with the setting, and most of my stories are in places I've lived, because I feel like I'm out of bounds if I'm not doing that. You know, one thing, or one reason that we brought all of us together tonight too, is we all chose to work with small presses. And Erin and I on the podcast, we talk a lot about small presses and try to look at a lot of those books, because it feels like that's where a lot of exciting stuff is happening. That's where the kinds of stories that you might find, or you might find kinds of stories there that you may not find in bigger books and more mass marketed books, those kinds of things. Would you agree with that? Or how did the process of partnering with a small press happen with you guys, and what do you like about it?
I will go. When OK Donkey kind of opened up for book submissions, I actually asked them, because I had another collection that had longer pieces, if they would, basically I had this collection that I was going to send to them, and they're like, well, there's not really a venue for flash collections. Mm-hmm. So we really want to keep it to flash. And that made sense. And so I sent them a flash collection, but flash in particular doesn't really have a place, unless you're Joy Williams, you know, in the bigger publishing world. And I think it should, but also it is nice to work directly with people and not, you know, I mean, I haven't been published by a big publishing house, and I know people who've had fantastic experiences, and I know people who haven't. So it's very specific to who you're dealing with, but it's nice to be more hands-on, to talk directly to the people making decisions. You know, there was some stuff with the cover, and so I made my cover. And it was really fun because I was like a little concerned about my cover. Though they had a fantastic artist who's done all of their books thus far. So it's nice to have kind of that hands-on and learning about the experience in a way that you might not otherwise. And I mean, again, I love lots of big publishing houses, books and stuff like that. But I mean, aren't we done with being told by, like, I'm going to sound like some ragey woman rager, but like,
We love ragey women.
Yes,
Go
we
for
do.
it.
like the capitalistic society telling us, like, you can have like these 2 social media accounts, or you can have, you know, these 5 computers, or like, or you can have these books and there's like 6 of them. Like, everything's gate kept in such a way that we're really only given certain decisions or certain choices. And so the independent presses, there's so many of them, it just broadens our choices for reading, writing, purchasing, all that stuff. So
I assume it's the same in America as it is in Canada, but that the most exciting fiction in Canada is coming out of independent presses, as far as I'm concerned. And I mean, my publisher is amazing, and I was super excited to work with them, and it was so intimate and nice. And I don't know what it's like. I also haven't been published by a large press. This was my first book, so I have no idea. I'm sure that experience also exists there. But in terms of just what you're reading, like, Arsenal publishes such an amazingly diverse group of mostly queer and BIPOC writers. Like, that just doesn't exist in the same way in big publishing houses, I don't think. So that's what's really exciting and nice about it for me.
That's a good point. I feel like in some of the bigger publishing companies, it's like you're allowed to have, you know, there's one queer book for the year, or there's one, you know, BIPOC book for the year. And independent presses are much more like, no, we want more books. We don't want to limit. We want to publish all of the books. And that's
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say I definitely agree that the independent press world is where the most exciting, fiction that's taking risks. I mean, work, not just fiction, work that's taking risks. Without question, there are a lot of writers in the United States. I mean, I don't know about Canada. Well, I do actually. I don't know. I have one Canadian. I have one friend who's a Canadian writer, but she lives here now. Her name is Bess Winter, and she's just fantastic. But she's from Toronto and lives in the States now. We did our PhD together. Without question, what you're saying about it's that it's not just that there's one queer book. It's like per year, there's like 2 books by women. I mean, anybody at all. There's like only 3. I mean, I am someone who the whole time I was working on my degrees, I didn't pay. I learned nothing of the actual publishing world. Like my first book came out last year. I knew less about publishing than any of you do. I was like, I had no idea what I was doing because I was told in my MFA, you focus on the art, you focus on the work, stop asking me questions about how to like publish your work or how to get it out into the world or agents or anything like that. So I really turned a blind eye, sort of to my detriment, but then also I couldn't have made it through all those years of learning how to write and knowing what was awaiting me in terms of the world of publication and how incredibly difficult it truly is. I think that, the publishing world is shrinking, and what's coming out from big presses, like there are fine writers who are writing, but there's a finite amount of money, and it just distresses me to no end. But it seems as though big publishing has to give way. I mean, it seems as though the direction we're heading in is it must give way at some point because it's just shrinking and shrinking and shrinking. I mean, I have continuously thought that like music, will publishing become entirely DIY and individually handled for the most part, like the big record companies of the 20th century, collapsing in the age of the internet? Will that happen with books? I mean, it seems like independent publishers, particularly really great, really those who have really putting and are putting out really great stuff are definitely doing the most exciting, putting out the most exciting work out there. And it's just, I mean, it's lamentable to me that there's not just more to go around. There are so many really phenomenal writers, and I want us all to be heard, and I want everyone who's worked to get their chance. But it's a small world, you know. But small presses are great. The ones I've worked with have been phenomenal. Sorry, I will go on and on. Sorry.
Another question popped up in the chat that's connected to this, so we'll go ahead and take that now. How many of you decided to go with an agent versus working with smaller presses directly? Does anyone have experience that they want to speak to both sides? Or
I worked with a small press directly, but I had worked with an agent for a year. And it was a very eye-opening experience that by the end of it, I realized it's not working for me. And so I made the decision to end that relationship and then focus on small presses. What about you guys?
Maybe it works differently here. I have an agent, but yeah, it's much easier. It's just much easier to get anything if you have an agent. Just much faster process. I'm assuming it's the same everywhere, but we didn't do a whole lot of, like, the work happened with the publisher.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think some agents are very editorial, and that was just happened to be the one that I was working with, and there was a different vision.
Right.
I not impossible, but a lot of agents aren't super interested in taking people up on short story collections. It can happen. But I didn't even try, but I did try with a novel, and I got lots of great feedback, lots of interest in my story and all this, but ultimately nobody signed me. And so if you want to get published by a big publishing house, you need an agent, or by certain larger independent presses now. I get it to some degree, for sure. But also, like, a lot of it ends up being a little gatekeepy as well. For me, it wasn't a choice, really, because if they're not that interested in short story collections, I'm not going to waste my time trying to pitch a short story collection for that one agent who might be interested in it. I am going to revise my novel, and I am going to keep trying to get an agent for that because I really believe in the story, and a lot of them said they'd be interested in looking at it again. This independent press doesn't seem like there's open contests, there's open submission periods. You just kind of have to know. And the more you get your name out there, the more you'll hear about stuff that may not be on websites and stuff like that. So, I submitted another collection. It's been a finalist at several contests. It's always a bridesmaid. But from that, I got some back channeling conversations from some great independent presses from that. So it wasn't really a choice so much as this is the direction that short story collections tend to go more often.
Yeah.
And I mean, agents do a lot of work. They're, they work hard and they work crazy hours, and I don't know when they ever get to read for fun. So I think a lot of people end up angry at agents because they're keeping them from their dream and all that stuff. But there are other ways to get to that dream. And also, like, agents aren't the devil. Some might be, but all the ones I've talked to and experienced, like, they're doing this for a reason. Nobody becomes an agent because they just want prestige, So anyway.
That's a great,
just gonna root for agents because my agent is amazing. And if you can find a really awesome agent they have a good relationship with, it's really lovely.
It's fantastic. And I know we're at 1 hour. I thought maybe for our final question, because we talk a lot about our current reading obsessions, and hopefully we're all, reading other books from small presses or big presses, wherever, maybe each of you could give a recommendation of what you're reading right now or something that really just surprised you recently.
I think she's going to get one.
We get a visual aid.
I'll go first. Yes. I recently read a book that it's unbelievable that I have not read before. Wait.
Oh, visual aids, Erin.
Love a visual aid.
Yes.
This is the best thing about Zoom.
My friend Kevin was like, I can't believe, I told him, like, we recently had lunch and I was like, I just read it. And he was like, you haven't read that before? Mrs. by Rachel Ingles. Do you guys know this book?
No.
Wow. Immediately read it.
Okay.
It is, for me, I was like, this is, it is a tragic comic, like everything that I write, or everything that I love and everything that I write. It's the story of a California housewife whose marriage is sort of dying on the vine, and she ends up falling in love with a frog man who has escaped from the Oceanic Research Institute. She hides him in her home, and they have a torrid love affair. And it is at once one of the funniest, the most eye-opening, and then most heart-rending, like absolutely tear your heart out and endings book I've ever read. And it's super short. I'm gonna try to write it like an essay. I'm gonna try to this year, when I have some time in the next few months, like I want to write an essay about it. But I highly recommend this to everybody alive.
Excellent.
Mrs. Caliban by Rachel Ingles.
Perfect. I just added that to the chat. Great. What about you, Jen Fliss?
This I just started reading. Can you see? By
No.
Chris Gonzalez, which I'm very excited about. Also, Secret Lives of Church Ladies by Disha Filia, which was last year or maybe the year before, because who knows what time it is anymore. Amazing. So good. So good. And then not an independent press, but Interior Chinatown by Charles Yu was outstanding. So, and kind of proof that that independent presses aren't really the only ones doing exciting stuff, because it's brilliant and interesting and exciting. So.
I love this book. You guys, just as an aside, I just got to interview him. It's Charles Yu for the Six Bridges Book Festival, which takes place here in my home city of Little Rock, Arkansas. It was virtual, but I got the honor of interviewing him about this book, and it was so much fun. It was so great. So I also love and endorse this book.
What about you, Carmella? Do you have any suggestions?
Yeah, well, I'm actually not reading any small press books. I was just thinking about that. But I'm really looking forward to reading my friend Helen Chow Bradley's book called Personal Attention Role Play, which will come out with Metonymy Press. I think it's actually out now, but there's been some delays with shipping. A really great short story collection that I read last year that I loved so much, that's not small press. I don't know if you get Canadian books, is How to Pronounce Knife by
Yeah, I've seen that.
Stephen, which is amazing. And I'm reading Fight Night by Miriam Tayze, which is also not small press, but exciting and good and hilarious, like so funny.
Woo!
It's like
Miriam.
skillful and funny.
You're a reader after my own heart.
So good.
Cool.
Well, we've taken more of your time than we intended, and all of you attendees as well. But this was wonderful. Thank you all for coming together. Really appreciate it. And thank you all for joining us.
Yes.
And look out, all of you attendees, all of you panelists, look out. We're going to be posting this recording so we can share it with other people. And you may see it all over the place. Right, Erin?
Yeah, let's hope, right?
You will.
And
Yes.
be sure to check out all the links we sent in the chat for each of our authors and each of our presses. And thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
for having us.
Thank you guys. Thank you,
Thank
Amy.
you.
All right.
Yeah.
Good night.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks.